Welcome back to Hot Air with me, Joshua Robert. And this episode came together while I was packing up my life into boxes and realizing just how emotional that actually is. In the middle of moving and somewhere between purging, reorganizing, and holding on to things that I have not touched in literal years. When I say maybe a decade, I'm not lying. I realized that I could have used some tools about moving and purging and packing a lot sooner. So, this episode is about clarity, not minimalism, not aesthetics, but why letting go can feel so fucking hard sometimes. Why clutter can feel protective, why upgrading your space or your life can trigger anxiety instead of excitement, and what's actually going on psychologically when we resist change. This applies whether you're moving, redecorating, upgrading your space, or just craving a fresh start without knowing where to even begin. But quick housekeeping before we get into it. Make sure you're following me on Instagram and TikTok at _hotairpod and visit hotairwithjoshuarobert.com to shop all of my fun merch, like my cute little mug that I'm always drinking out of. I don't even need to say it anymore, but it's in my hand and there's coffee in it today. Shop my merch, submit your listener stories, and send me some topic suggestions. And one more thing, because I am moving, visuals for Hot Air may change over the next few weeks or even months while I get settled. Some episodes might not have visuals. I'll be shifting to one episode per week until about around April time, probably. April time. I don't even know if that's proper English, but until around April, because I'm traveling, I'm trying to pack, I'm trying to build a whole new podcast space, and I want to focus on quality over just pumping out 2 episodes a week. And I'm sure you can imagine how much work that is to write scripts, record, edit, create the marketing content, the web pages, upload for 2 almost full hour episodes a week. Or I might go to the Friday episodes being those mini episodes again that I used to call hot flashes, which maybe I'll bring those back. News updates may happen only once a month and just kind of round up what happened the whole month. So as I always say, the podcast is going to evolve and change over time, but just start expecting 1 episode per week, and I'll drop some surprise episodes here and there. So that's my housekeeping. Let's get into some of the chaos that I've been experiencing while trying to pack and purge over the last few weeks, and some of the lessons I have learned and some of the tools that will hopefully help you purge, find clarity, fresh start, all of that wonderful stuff in 2026. So let's hit it. Part 1. Why letting go feels like losing a piece of yourself. Letting go rarely feels like decluttering. It feels like grief sometimes, and not the dramatic kind, not the kind with casseroles and sympathy cards and bouquets of very tacky flowers, but the quiet, internal kind where you're standing in front of a pile of things, asking yourself why a jacket, a stack of random papers, or an object that you have not touched in years suddenly feels irreplaceable. It's not about that specific thing. It's about what that thing represents. And that's why purging can feel so personal. From a psychological standpoint, this reaction is deeply human. One of the strongest forces at play is something called the endowment effect. In simple terms, we assign more value to things simply because they belong to us. Ownership creates emotional inflation. The moment something becomes mine, it becomes harder to part with, even if its practical value has not changed at all. This is why someone else's clutter looks like junk, while our clutter looks like memories, potential, and meaning. But the endowment effect alone does not fully explain the resistance. Objects don't just belong to us, they often stand in for us. They become extensions of identity. Psychologists refer to this as symbolic self-completion, which is the idea that when our sense of self feels incomplete or unstable or in flux, we use symbols, like possessions, to reinforce who we believe we are or who we once were. That's why getting rid of something tied to a former version of yourself can feel like erasing proof that you ever existed in that way, and maybe even erasing proof of your evolution from who you used to be to who you are now. And I think that's kind of what I'm experiencing as I'm purging my current apartment that I've lived in for 7 years. And clothing is a perfect example. We don't just see fabric, we see eras, the body that we had, the confidence that we felt or wanted to feel, the job we wore it to, the relationship we were in when we bought it. Letting go of those clothes can feel like admitting that that chapter is officially over, and that closure, even when it's healthy, can sting a little bit. Truth be told, I still have my baseball jersey from when I was like 6 years old. And I will probably keep that until the day that I die, highly likely. But there's things that I've gotten rid of over the years that have been tough to get rid of because I look at it and I go, oh, I remember that little person or who I was as a teenager or even from a decade ago. And it reminds me of how far that I've come. So I place a lot of emotional value. I've talked about this with my therapist on objects, inanimate objects, because it just reminds me of the evolution of who I've become. Now, there's also the psychological concept of identity continuity, which suggests that humans need to feel like they are the same person over time, even as they change. And objects help bridge that gap. They reassure us that growth has not completely erased us, that evolution hasn't invalidated who we were. When we purge too quickly or too harshly, it can feel like severing that continuity, like we're betraying a former self who tried their best with what they had. This is exactly why people often say things like, I might need this someday, even when that day is probably never going to come and it's very unrealistic. That statement usually is not about future utility, it's about emotional permission. Getting rid of something can feel like you're closing the door on a possible version of yourself, and the brain, wired for survival, does not like closed doors. I've done this a lot. I had dreams of buying a cabin in Big Bear here in Southern California and redecorating it and creating a beautiful Airbnb that I could rent out to people. The snow seasons have become basically non-existent here, so I'm glad I didn't do that because I've been told by my real estate agent that I was talking to that people are selling their cabins because there's no snow up there. So dodged a bullet there. But this is really random. But I buy this coffee that's local, and it's in these cans that I think are really cute, and they're like a brown and a beige. They kind of look like a vintage Italian like coffee style. I don't know. So I started keeping them, and when I tell you that I just threw out about 40 of them, that's not an exaggeration. I had this idea of lining the whole top of the cabin with those tins and putting plants in them and just like creating a really cool rustic, I don't even know. But I had this idea. So I kept holding on to it, holding on to it, holding on to it. And really that was me holding on to that dream of having that cabin. And now that I've just thrown them out because I was like, what the fucking hell am I doing with all of these cans? I'm not bringing these to my new apartment. It kind of close that chapter, which can be sad, but also reassuring. And it just kind of, reminded me that maybe that goal has changed. And I can come up with bigger goals in the future, new goals. But those cans were a symbol of that giant dream that I had. Another layer underneath the resistance is loss aversion, a well documented psychological bias where losses feel more painful than gains feel pleasurable. Even when gaining space, clarity, and calm, the act of losing something, like physically removing it, registers as a threat. The brain reacts as if something valuable is being taken, even if it's never used, and actively contributing to stress. This is why purging can feel exhausting instead of freeing in the moment, and relief often comes way later down the road. Objects also act as memory containers. We tell ourselves that if we get rid of that item, we lose the memory. But memory doesn't actually live in objects. We know that it lives in the brain. The object is just a trigger. Still, the fear feels very real, especially for people who are sentimental or creative or deeply reflective. Objects can feel like anchors to moments that mattered. Letting go can feel like forgetting, even though forgetting is not actually happening. And so someone like me, who I really like to look back and learn from lessons and learn from points in my life and make changes and adjustments. And I'm also very creative, as I've talked about many, many a time. I'll hold on to random things, like truly, again, I'm going to sound like such a hoarder this episode, but a mirror that I found in the alleyway probably 2 years ago. Really cool, almost like, what is that? Kind of like an acid wash kind of situation on the mirror. and I'm like, oh, I can make a really cool art piece out of this. Have I? No, but I see things and I see the potential. So I kind of hold on to them. But I am not a hoarder. Okay. I just threw out 40 cans of coffee. Let me live. There's also a quieter, more vulnerable reason that letting go is so hard: self-forgiveness. Many items we struggle to part with are tied to unmet expectations. Books we didn't read, hobbies we didn't pursue, projects we abandoned, clothes we bought for a version of ourselves that never fully arrived, mirrors we found in the alleyway we never made art out of, coffee tins that we're never going to put in a cabinet in Big Bear that we're probably never going to buy. But holding on to those items can feel like holding on to hope or avoiding the guilt of acknowledging that some paths simply did not and will not unfold. In that sense, purging isn't just about sorting your belongings, it's about reckoning with reality, about saying, this mattered once, but it no longer reflects who I am. And why am I getting emotional right now? Hello. We got to keep this going here. I'm purging right now. So maybe it's probably going to hit me soon that, like, I'll get into the story of this apartment later. We'll get into that. So, as I said, this mattered once, but it no longer reflects who I am. And that statement requires a level of emotional maturity, maybe that I don't have because I almost just cried, and self-compassion that many people have not practiced intentionally. And some of these tools are probably going to come in handy for myself. This is also why big life changes like moving, breakups, career shifts, just aging or loss make purging particularly intense. During transitions, identity feels less stable. When the internal world feels uncertain, the external world becomes something we try to control. And clutter, oddly enough, can provide comfort during these times. It's familiar, it's known. Even chaos can feel safer than emptiness when you don't yet know what's coming next. Psychologists sometimes describe clutter as emotional armor, and not in a dramatic way, but as a buffer. A room full of stuff can feel grounding when everything else feels up in the air. Clearing space creates openness, and openness requires a little bit of trust, and trust that you'll fill that space with something better. Trust that you don't need the backup versions of yourself anymore or the backup versions of those coffee tins. Trust that you are allowed to evolve. That trust is often what's missing. There's also a cultural narrative that complicates things further, at least over here in the West. We're taught to preserve, to save, to hold on to proof of success and struggle alike. Getting rid of things can feel wasteful or ungrateful, especially for people who grew up with scarcity, instability, or emotional inconsistency. Objects can represent security. So letting go can feel extremely reckless, even when it's rational. So, how do you purge without feeling like you are erasing yourself? The first step is reframing what letting go actually means. It is not rejection. It is not failure. It is not forgetting. Letting go is actually recognition. Recognition that something served a purpose once and that its purpose has been fulfilled. That's not loss. That is completion. It did its job. We've all come to a point where we've done our job and we move on. Something has run its course, and that's that. One helpful exercise is separating memory from material. When you encounter an item that feels emotionally loaded, just pause for a second and ask yourself, what am I actually afraid of losing here? And write it down if you need to. Often the answer has nothing to do with the object itself. It might be a feeling, a moment, a version of confidence, or a relationship dynamic. Once you name it, the object loses some of its power. Another technique is what psychologists call transitional acknowledgement. Before letting go of something, intentionally thank it. Not in a performative, like weird way, but in a grounding way. Acknowledge what it represented to you, what it helped you through, or what it symbolized at the time. This helps the brain process the release as intentional rather than forced, which is going to reduce the emotional resistance. There's also value in graduated purging. You don't have to go from cluttered to minimalist overnight. In fact, drastic purges can trigger a lot of regret and reinforce avoidance. It's like jumping into a crazy workout at the gym when you've never been before. You're probably not going to want to go again. So start with items that carry the least emotional charge. Build evidence that letting go does not result in catastrophe. The brain learns through experience, not logic. For items that are tied to identity shifts, try this exercise. Create a past selves box. Instead of keeping everything scattered throughout your space, choose a limited container and allow yourself to keep only what truly represents meaningful chapters. The boundary matters. It turns hoarding into curation. And it says, I honor where I've been, but it doesn't get unlimited real estate in my present life. Another powerful reframe is asking alignment-based questions instead of joy-based ones. Instead of, does this spark joy? Which I think that's what Mary, is it Mary or Marie Kondo said? I'm not trying to shit on her, but instead of asking, does this spark joy? Ask, does this reflect who I am now? Does this support the life I'm actively building? Am I keeping this out of fear or intention? And then ask yourself, does this spark joy? Fear-based keeping usually sounds like a just in case or a what if or a someday. Intention-based keeping feels grounded and very specific. For people who struggle with guilt, like me, my conscience is always guilty, even if I've done nothing absolutely wrong, especially around expensive or gifted items. It helps to remember that the value was in the use, not the actual possession. Keeping something that you resent or don't use doesn't honor the money that was spent or the person who gave it to you. It just prolongs discomfort. For example, today while I was purging, I have a little bin that has throw blankets in it. And I have this one blue blanket. It's like a fleece blanket that one of my best friends, Erica, shout out Erica, all the way up in Canada. Her nickname is Moish. We don't know why. It's actually our nickname for each other. Don't ask. I was like looking at this blue blanket she gave me. It was when I went on my first cruise ship contract when I was 18 years old. I'm 37 now. So I have had this blanket for 20 years and it is still in great shape. It still keeps me warm on the couch sometimes, but I'm like, do I need this? So I text her and I said, do I need to keep this blue blanket? Should I throw it out? She said, I need to keep it. And instead of throwing it out and keeping all the other blankets, I kept that one and I got rid of the rest. So it did make me feel like a little bit guilty. It is a blanket that I use, but there is some value in it. Like I think it'd be really cute to just like when she comes to visit me, to still have that. Some things have sentimental value and I can't get rid of them. And sometimes you have to text your friend that gave it to you. And if they don't care, if she would have been like, oh, it's fine, whatever, throw it out. But she told me to keep it. So I'm going to keep the blue fleece 20-year-old blanket. But my point in all that was I felt guilt. I was like, oh, she gave this to me 20 years ago. It was like in this monumental moment of my life that really changed the trajectory of my life and allowed me to move to LA and all of the things that led me to where I am now. And whenever I look at that blanket, I think about that, and that's important to me. So I did feel the guilt. I checked in with it. There may come a day when I look back and I go, okay, it's time to get rid of this blanket, but that time isn't now. But I got rid of a bunch of other ones, so that were not sentimental. And well, on that note, it's also worth acknowledging that purging can bring up unexpected emotions like sadness, anxiety, even anger sometimes. That doesn't mean that you're doing it wrong. It means you're touching something real. And growth often feels a little bit heavier before it feels lighter. And ultimately, letting go feels like losing a piece of yourself because in a way, it is. It kind of is. But it's not the essential part. It's the part that no longer needs to be carried forward. Identity isn't diminished by release. It's clarified by it. And clarity doesn't come from erasing who you were. It comes from choosing consciously and compassionately who you're ready to be now. And one other tool that I've been using for a few years now when I am trying to purge things, quite frankly, this has been a very long process of purging over maybe the last 2-3-ish years where I've really started going through stuff, old photos and things that I took with me from Canada, again, 20 years ago almost, that I'm finally like, it's okay to let these things go. Like your mom is not going to be mad at you because you got rid of the ice cream scoop that she sent you here with. She'll be like, why the hell do you have that, Josh? But I sit there with these things. I look at them, not for a very long time, but I'm like, am I going to feel bad about this? And if I put it in the trash box or the donate box, I donate most of this stuff, and I feel a little bit guilty, but I know I don't need it, I take a photo of it. and I leave that photo on my iPhone. And then I will put that photo in my hard drive. And if there ever comes a day when I'm like, oh, I want to revisit some of that stuff and feel the sentimental value of it all, I'll go revisit the photos instead of having this clutter laying around my apartment. So it could be your old baseball jersey. It could be a gift that somebody gave you. It could be that blue fleece blanket. Take a photo of it, save it on your phone for later, get rid of the actual object, and just remember that if you miss it, if you feel something about it later, you can come back to that photo and feel good about it because you'll at least have a little piece of it. If you're like me, it's kind of hard to let go. And that brings us to something I touched on a little bit earlier, part 2, clutter as emotional armor. Now, clutter doesn't usually show up as a problem. It shows up as protection. That's what makes it so difficult to confront. If clutter were just about mess, people would get rid of it very easily. But clutter often serves a purpose that has nothing to do with organization and everything to do with safety. It creates a buffer between us and the world, between us and uncertainty, between us and silence. From a psychological perspective, clutter can function as emotional armor, a way of insulating ourselves from discomfort, from vulnerability or change. And when life feels unpredictable or overwhelming or out of control, the environment becomes something we can manage. Objects become stabilizers, even when the space feels absolutely chaotic. It's a familiar chaos, and familiarity to the nervous system often equals safety. One of the key concepts at play here is perceived control. Humans have a deep psychological need to feel a sense of agency over their environment. When emotional or relational control feels compromised during transitions like moving, breakups, identity shifts, or career uncertainty, people often unconsciously tighten control in areas that feel more manageable. Physical space is one of the most accessible places to do that. Clutter can also act as a form of avoidance. Empty space forces reflection. Silence invites awareness. A cluttered environment, on the other hand, keeps the mind occupied. It gives the eyes something to land on, or gives the feet something to try to maneuver over, depending on how much of an issue the clutter is. It reduces the chance of sitting still with unresolved feelings. In this way, clutter isn't laziness or lack of discipline, it's a coping mechanism. And I had a friend that had a very cluttered schedule, always had social activities every single solitary day because they were avoiding their life. And I suppose physical clutter acts in the exact same way. When you're surrounded by, like, we've all seen hoarders, right? If you haven't, like, you need to, but don't watch too many because it's very dramatic to watch. But we've all seen hoarders where there's either boxes piled up or newspapers from decades ago piled up, and you're just like, these people are maneuvering around them. Like, that is a distraction from the deeper issue within themselves. There's also the concept of environmental mirroring. Our outer spaces often reflect our inner states. So when emotions feel layered, unresolved, or contradictory, the physical environment may mirror that complexity. Trying to force order onto a space before addressing the emotional landscape can feel invasive and even threatening. The clutter is not the problem, it's the symptom. So take, for example, when you feel like shit and you're like, ugh, I don't feel like doing the dishes today. I just want to go lay down. But imagine that on such a larger scale. This becomes especially apparent during periods of transition. Moving is one of the most destabilizing experiences, psychologically speaking. It disrupts your routine, sensory familiarity, and spatial memory. When you're between places, your sense of grounding is temporarily suspended. Holding on to objects during that time can feel like holding on to certainty. They become anchors while everything else is in flux. Another layer of emotional armor comes from temporal buffering. Clutter can make time feel less linear. Surrounded by items from different eras of your life, you're never fully in the present. Past, present, and future coexist in physical form. For some people, that can be very comforting. It softens the finality of change. It makes transitions feel less abrupt. But armor, by definition, is meant to protect against threat. The question then becomes, what threat is clutter protecting you from? And often, it's vulnerability. Empty space exposes you. It reveals what's missing. It invites comparison. It removes distraction. A cleared space can feel like standing under a spotlight with nothing to hide behind. That's not inherently bad. For some, it can feel very uncomfortable and it can feel intense if you're already emotionally raw. Clutter can also protect against identity destabilization. When you are not fully sure who you're becoming, holding on to the tangible markers of who you've been can feel pretty grounding. Objects can say, at least this part of me is still here. And letting go can feel like stepping into an undefined version of yourself without a safety net. And this is where the queer perspective comes in, because for queer people, this dynamic can be amplified. Queer identity is often formed in environments where emotional safety was not guaranteed. Many queer people grow up feeling unseen and misunderstood or conditionalized, loved only when certain parts of themselves are hidden or minimized. And in those contexts, physical objects can become a source of unconditional presence. They don't judge, they don't reject, they just stay. Psychologically, this can lead to a stronger emotional bond with physical possessions. Objects become reliable witnesses to identity development. They hold stories that weren't always reflected or validated externally. A piece of clothing, a book, a poster, a memento from a trip or relationship might represent a moment of authenticity in a world that did not always allow it. There's also the reality of delayed self expression, which many queer people spend years suppressing or postponing aspects of themselves. When they finally gain access to freedom, whether it's financial, geographic, or just emotional, objects can become symbols of that liberation. And letting go of them later can feel like you're giving up proof of survival or resilience. Additionally, queer people often experience chosen family rather than consistent biological support. In the absence of stable interpersonal anchors, material anchors can take on more weight. They become reminders of connection and belonging or self creation. The object isn't just an object, it's evidence that you built something for yourself. Now, this doesn't mean that queer people are more materialistic. I mean, we can be sometimes. We like nice things, okay? But it could mean that objects carry emotional functions that were not met elsewhere. There's also a protective element that is tied to visibility. So for queer people, being seen has historically come with a risk. And clutter can provide a kind of visual noise that diffuses attention. It allows you to blend into your environment rather than stand out. A curated, open, intentional space can feel like a giant declaration, and declarations can feel dangerous even when they are safe, well, sort of safe now. From a nervous system perspective, clutter can also help regulate anxiety. A visually dense environment can reduce the sense of exposure. It creates a kind of cocoon effect. This is why some people feel more anxious in sparse, empty spaces. The openness registers as vulnerability and not calm. It can feel very exposing. The challenge comes when armor outlives its usefulness. What once protected you can begin to weigh you down. Clutter can start to restrict movement, focus, and rest. It can subtly reinforce the belief that safety comes from holding on rather than trusting yourself. Letting go of clutter then isn't about stripping yourself bare. It's about assessing whether the armor is still serving you or if it's keeping you stuck in a defensive posture when you are ready to move forward. One way to approach this gently is through a function-based exercise rather than an emotional one. So start by choosing one area of your space, not a whole room, not a category, just a surface, like a single drawer or your coffee table. Instead of asking what to keep or discard, ask yourself, what is this area doing for me right now? Is it storing things? Is it displaying things? Is it hiding? Is it comforting? Is it distracting? Then ask, what do I want this area to do for me instead? This shifts the focus from objects to intention. Once the function is clear, decisions become easier, not because they are less emotional, but because they're anchored in purpose. So, for example, right now, my coffee table is cluttered. Yes, I am moving, but lately it has been a storage area for documents and things that don't necessarily belong there. And that can feel like, to me, I get overwhelmed. I'm like, ugh, the space is not like tidy, it's not clean, it's not calming for me. I want that coffee table to be more of a display space, something that is clean, clear, and nice. So realizing what it's doing for me and what I want it to do is going to help me A, throw that shit in the trash or find a new home for it, and B, set up a new little area so that it can be more of a display. And I think you get the gist, right? That's the exercise. And another important step is distinguishing between protection and avoidance. Protection supports growth, avoidance postpones it. Pretty straightforward. If clutter is helping you rest, feel held, or transition slowly, that may be appropriate. If it's preventing you from engaging with your life fully, it may be time to renegotiate that relationship. For queer people especially, it's important to approach this without shame. Clutter did not appear out of nowhere. It formed in response to real experiences, real needs, real gaps in safety or affirmation. The goal isn't to rip it away, but to simply understand it. Letting go can be framed as updating your protection, not removing it. You're not saying, I don't need safety anymore. You're saying, I'm building safety differently now. That might mean keeping fewer objects, but choosing them more intentionally. It might mean creating space that reflects who you are now, not who you had to be in order to survive. It might mean allowing your environment to be supportive rather than defensive. Clutter as emotional armor makes sense. It's adaptive, it's human, but growth often requires us to put down what we no longer need to carry. Not because it was wrong to carry it, but because we are stronger now and maybe we don't need that armor. And strength sometimes just looks like space. Part 3. Purging isn't minimalism, it's boundaries. Purging often gets mislabeled as minimalism, and that misunderstanding is part of why it feels so loaded. Minimalism, at least as it's marketed, suggests aesthetic restraint or visual calm and owning less for the sake of owning less. But purging, like real purging, isn't about reducing quantity. It's about defining limits. It's about deciding what gets access to your space, your attention, and your emotional energy. In that sense, purging is an act of boundary setting. And you all know I fucking love a boundary. Boundaries aren't walls. They are filters. They determine what stays, what goes, and what never gets invited in again. When applied to physical space, boundaries tend to force clarity, and clarity can be very uncomfortable because it requires choice. You can't keep everything once you decide what actually belongs. From a psychological standpoint, difficulty purging often reflects weak or blurred boundaries, not laziness or indecision, so don't get too hard on yourself. When boundaries are unclear internally, they're unclear externally, and objects linger because nothing has been explicitly told that they no longer belong. One of the reasons that people resist purging is because boundaries require us to tolerate that discomfort. Saying no to people, opportunities, habits, or objects activates a lot of anxiety. The brain interprets exclusion as a risk, and this is rooted in social survival wiring. Historically, being excluded from the group meant danger. And even now, the nervous system reacts as if rejection or anything could lead to loss or instability. So, when you get rid of something, especially something tied to your identity or the effort you put in life, the body may respond with stress. And it doesn't matter that that thing is inanimate. The nervous system is not rational, as we know and as I've said, but it is protective. Another psychological factor at play is role confusion. Many people keep objects that belong to roles that they no longer occupy because they haven't consciously released that role. So whether they were the student, the partner, the struggling version of themselves, the aspirational version, purging forces a kind of reckoning. Is this still mine to carry? So minimalism asks, how little can I live with? But boundaries ask, what am I responsible for and what am I not? This distinction matters. And if you want to be a minimalist, go for it. Be a minimalist. But, it still matters to define the difference between a boundary and being a minimalist. Let's be real. Boundaries also require self-trust. You have to trust that if you need something again, you'll be able to handle it. That you won't collapse without the backup versions of yourself stored in closets and drawers. When self-trust is very low, people over-prepare materially. Objects become insurance policies against self-doubt. And maybe That's why I'm able to purge so much right now because I have far less self-doubt than I think I've ever had in my life. This is why purging often feels easier for people who feel stable and supported, and nearly impossible for people in transition. Boundaries feel safer when you believe that you can enforce them. Again, there's also that cultural narrative that conflates boundaries with coldness. Like letting go can feel kind of cruel or wasteful or ungrateful, especially for those people who were taught to over accommodate or to equate worth with usefulness. Keeping things becomes a way to avoid guilt altogether. But boundaries are not about punishment, they are about sustainability. A space without boundaries becomes overwhelmed. A life without boundaries becomes overextended. Purging is the physical manifestation of deciding that your environment doesn't need to absorb everything that crosses your path. For queer people in particular, boundary setting can feel very complicated. Many queer individuals grew up adapting to others for safety, monitoring their tone or their behavior or their expression. When you've learned to prioritize external comfort over internal alignment, boundaries can feel pretty selfish and even dangerous. Physical boundaries, like saying no to objects that no longer serve you, can trigger that same conditioning. But a boundary isn't a rejection of the past, it's an agreement with the present and looking forward to the future. Purging, then, is not about emptiness, it's about intentional containment. It's saying that this space has a purpose and not everything gets to live here. So here's a little tool to help with that. It is called the permission slip exercise. And this one can feel a little funny, okay? But I kind of dig it. So choose one category of items that feels emotionally neutral, but plentiful. That could be paperwork, that could be decor, or kitchen items, or toiletries. Before touching anything, write a short permission slip to yourself. I give myself permission to release what no longer supports who I am now. I am not obligated to keep things out of guilt, fear, or habit. Then, for each item, ask one question only. Does this earn its place in my space today? Not, did this matter once? Not, will I need this someday? But does it earn its place now? This whole exercise reframes purging as a boundary decision, not a value judgment. And when I tell you, I could probably do this with my toiletries today, and maybe should, the amount of stuff I need to get rid of. I do love me some skincare, but Lord, I'm going to need to take my own advice from this episode. Part 4, why we sabotage our own upgrades. Upgrading your life sounds exciting in theory. A better apartment, a healthier routine, more aligned relationships, more space, more ease. But when it actually becomes possible, many people hesitate or actively sabotage it. Not because they don't want better, but because better comes with consequences. Psychologically, this is often driven by status quo bias, the brain's tendency to prefer what's familiar, even if it's uncomfortable, over what's unknown. Familiar discomfort feels safer than unfamiliar improvement. At least you know how to survive where you are. Upgrades destabilize identity. They change your expectations. They raise the bar, not just externally, but internally. With improvement comes visibility, and with visibility comes accountability, and with accountability comes fear. There's also fear of success, which is less about achieving goals and more about maintaining them. Success introduces pressure. If you upgrade your space, can you live up to it? If you improve your circumstances, can you sustain them? The mind often decides it's safer not to try at all than to try and fail at a higher level. Another layer is imposter syndrome. When your environment improves faster than your internal self-concept, a mismatch occurs. You may feel like you don't belong in that upgraded version of your life yet. And that discomfort can lead to procrastination, self-sabotage, or clinging to old patterns that feel more, quote unquote, accurate. There's also grief embedded in upgrades. Upgrading means leaving something behind. Sometimes people, sometimes versions of yourself, sometimes entire ways of being. Even when the upgrade is desired, the loss can be very real. The brain doesn't distinguish between good and bad change, it just registers change as a whole. For queer people, upgrades can activate deeper fears tied to visibility and safety. Being more seen, more successful, more settled can feel kind of risky because historically, standing out has not always been safe. Subconsciously, staying smaller or messier can feel kind of protective. There's also the internalized belief that struggle equals authenticity. That ease must be earned through prolonged hardship. Upgrading can trigger guilt. Who am I to have this? That guilt often disguises itself as practicality or humility. So self sabotage then isn't a flaw, it's a protective reflex. But protection becomes limitation when it's no longer necessary. The key to navigating upgrades isn't forcing confidence, it's building capacity. You don't leap into a new life, you acclimate to it. The nervous system needs time to adjust. This is why slow, intentional upgrades tend to stick more than dramatic overhauls. When change happens faster than integration, the body is going to push back. Upgrading your space, your habits, or your identity requires emotional permission, not just logistical readiness. And here's a tool to help with that. This one is called the threshold exercise. Identify one upgrade that you are resisting, not avoiding, but resisting. Ask yourself, what would actually change if I allowed this upgrade? What would be expected of me afterward? And what part of me feels threatened by that expectation? It's a lot of questions, right? Well, there's more. Then ask, what support would make this feel safer? Not how do I force myself through it, but how do I make this survivable for my nervous system? Sometimes sabotaging isn't about fear of failure. It's fear of being alone at the next level. This exercise helps name that fear so it can be addressed rather than acted out. Upgrades don't require perfection. They require permission. Permission to grow without punishment, permission to leave behind what no longer fits, permission to take up more space, both literally and emotionally. And that permission is something only you can give yourself. And now, it is time for story time. As I alluded to earlier in the episode, I was going to go on a big old tangent about this current space that I'm living in right now. So I have lived here for 7 years. And when I moved into the space, I had very little money. I came to this apartment, I looked at a studio apartment, I looked at a one-bedroom apartment. There was a $100 difference, and that $100 difference was stressful for me. That's how little income I had at the time. I didn't have a car. I don't even think I had credit cards at the time. So truthfully, I'm like, how did I even get this apartment? But I was like, take the leap, take the risk, get the one bedroom. Like, you've always lived in studios and smaller spaces, get the one bedroom. So I took that leap and it was stressful. It was scary. I remember texting my sister and she's like, just go for it. It's only $100. That $100 was a lot to me at the time, 7 years ago when I had just probably turned 30. I had also just gone through a very large breakup. And this was my first apartment really by myself after that breakup. And so everything here to me is a symbol of growth and evolution and healing. I took down some art today that I made and it was so janky. It's like a foam board and like yarn and this fabric that was on sale and I'm never going to use it again. So I threw it out and I took a moment and was like, do you keep this? Do you get rid of it? And then I stood there and I just acknowledged like, I am a different person now. I can, if I want to make it again, I would definitely make a nicer version, a more expensive version, a higher end version, or I can go buy something. And that is representative of where I am now versus where I was then. Also in this apartment, I've redecorated a lot of times. As my income has increased over the years, I've replaced older stuff with newer stuff, lower quality things with higher quality things. And even getting rid of that cheaper shit was also challenging for me, even if somebody was coming to pick it up because I sold it on Facebook Marketplace because it was a symbol of my growth and my healing and my evolution. I then got back together with the person that I had broken up with. We ended up getting married and we lived here for a bit. That marriage did not work out. We didn't even work out for a whole year. It was like 9 months and he moved back out. And so then I started again. I really started fresh like 2 times in this apartment. Well, maybe 3 times if you think about it. Moved in single, then he moved in, we started again, then he moved out and I started again on my own. And that last time was the biggest evolution of myself when I finally started going after my dreams, my aspirations, this larger version of me. And there finally came a time recently in the last, it was maybe November, it's mid-January now, when I was like, it's time to move. And it was the first time I said it in which I felt like internally I aligned with that, because I knew I've known for years that I've outgrown this space, literally years, but it was comfortable. It was a little bit cluttered. There's things that I could have gotten rid of a very long time ago. But as I've said through this whole episode, I felt comfortable. I felt safe. I didn't have to think about spending more money on rent or redecorating a new space or finding somewhere that I feel like is going to be home, because this has felt like home for the longest time. And there was one day in November, I just looked around and I was like, I've outgrown this spot. And it finally felt like my words aligned with how I was feeling emotionally and aligned with my surroundings. So I took the leap. I went and got a 2-bedroom apartment for myself, 2-bedroom, 2-bath with, I can't wait to share all the photos on Instagram because the closet is fucking gigantic and I live for a walk-in closet. And it's an insane upgrade. It's twice the size of where I am now, actually a little bit more than twice the size. Of course, that comes with more money that I need to put towards rent every month, $700 extra a month. And that made me a little bit nervous, that discomfort. But I sat down with myself and I said, that discomfort is going to allow me to grow. It's not a discomfort that I'm going to struggle with so hard that I won't be able to, meet that expectation and pay my rent on time. But my friend Jordan also gave me a really good reframe here, because I wasn't ashamed of being nervous and feeling discomfort. I reached out to multiple friends and I was like, should I do this? Is this the right choice? Like, this financial, it's an extra, I don't even want to use the word burden, but it's an extra financial responsibility. Let's go with that. And Jordan said to me, when you moved into the apartment you're living in now, you were scared about how much it was going to cost you, but that forced you into a place of discomfort, which forced you into a place of growth, which forced you into a place of where you are now. I have doubled my income in the last 7 years. Well, more than doubled. I've almost tripled it since I've moved in here. And he said, you may go there to your new apartment and feel that same discomfort that you felt 7 years ago, but that is going to force you into another position in which you will upgrade and elevate again. And perhaps I will need to work a little bit more. Perhaps I will need to find more marketing clients. Perhaps I'm going to need to focus in more on the podcast and get some ads going. Like, it's going to put me in a position in which I have no option but to evolve yet again, which is what I want to keep doing my whole life. And that really solidified it for me. Another thing that is pretty crazy, I love numbers and also little signs from the universe. At Christmas, I got a bunch of little gift cards, cash, checks, et cetera, from the people that I personal train and that take my classes. And all of the cash and the checks, not the gift cards because I can't use those for rent, but all of the cash and the checks. And I got one payment from a marketing client that I do every few months, was the exact amount for my deposit for this new apartment. Exactly, to the dollar, to the cents. And I was like, if this is not a sign from the universe that I just got all this extra cash from people that appreciate my hard work and it's the exact amount, I need to take this apartment. So I did. So all of that to say, I'm purging right now. I'm packing right now. There's been moments where I get really nervous about throwing things out, and I've used the tools I've talked about in this episode. Some I haven't, and some I will moving forward because I'm not completely done moving yet. But this is an era of growth, of evolution, of change, of leveling up. And while I'm nervous, I'm also excited. While I have a bit of anxiety, I'm also feeling inspired. So there's a lot of emotions. It's going to be challenging to leave this space simply because this was really where I became who I am now. And I'm proud of who I am now. And I hope that this next space is going to be an even better space for Hot Air. To have a whole podcast studio is going to be crazy. Sound quality is going to be better. The visuals are going to be better. And it's just going to give me more space to just like level up again. So I think that's what this whole episode really, for me anyway, is about. And I'm hoping that you stick with me on this journey. And I hope that some of these lessons also helped you. And I hope that story made sense. So if there's one thing that I hope that you take away from this episode, it's that clearing space is not about getting rid of stuff. It's about understanding why you're holding onto it in the first place. We talked about why letting go can feel like losing a piece of yourself, how clutter can act as emotional armor when life feels uncertain, why purging is not minimalism, but it is boundaries, and why so many of us sabotage our own upgrades even when we swear we're ready for change. And all of the queer perspective, too, really solidifies why I hold on to so much stuff and sometimes why I hold myself back. So knowing that now, I'm like, okay, Josh, you're doing the right thing. We're leveling the fuck up this year. Also, none of this is about shame. It's about awareness, about realizing that what you keep, what you release, and what you resist all tell a story about where you've been and where you're trying to go. If this episode resonated with you, share it. Send it to a friend who's moving, who's redecorating, who's stuck or overwhelmed or quietly craving a fresh start. Wherever you're listening, make sure you like, subscribe, leave a review. Those things, leaving those reviews, people, genuinely help Hot Air reach more people who might need this exact conversation. And if you want to stay connected, you can follow me on Instagram and TikTok at _hotairpod. And also visit my website, hotairwithjoshuarobert.com, to shop merch, submit your listener stories, and send in some topic ideas for future episodes. So thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. I hope that you level up. I hope you purge a little bit. Throw that fucking t-shirt out from your ex from 6 years ago because he is dead to you. Don't be afraid to level up, to clear your clutter, to be one with the fear of changing and elevating. So thanks for listening to Hot Air. I'm Joshua Robert, and I will see you next Tuesday.